Our special guest speaker is Graeme Innes. Graeme is a lawyer, mediator and company director. He has been a human rights practitioner for more than 30 years. Graeme was a commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission for almost 9 years, responsible for issues relating to disability, race and human rights. In this role, he led work on the ratification by Australia of a UN Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities, the Same-Sex Entitlements Inquiry, regulations in the area of accessible buildings and transport, work with industry on TV and movie captions and accessible banking standards, and 3 inspections of Australia's immigration detention centres. Graeme was awarded an AM for his work on the development of the Disability Discrimination Act and was a finalist for Australian of the Year. He is married with 2 children, loves cricket as a spectator, sailing as a participant, and relaxing by enjoying fine Australian wine.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you at this forum. As a bit of a worn-out old advocate, I wondered if you'd want me to come up here to speak. When after all discrimination against people with disability in Australia has been fixed. Oh, hasn't anyone told you that? Isn't that your experience? Well, you know, I thought that's why we didn't need a full-time Disability Discrimination Commissioner anymore, with lived experience of disability and who knows the disability sector. I thought there were no people with disabilities still living in institutions, and that we were all enjoying community life. At least that's what the government told me, that's what the Attorney General told me. Maybe they got it wrong. Do you think so? Well, okay. Well, if that's the case, I'd better throw away the celebratory speech that I'd planned to give this morning and cancel that case of champagne for lunchtime. I mean, can I? Oh, all right, okay. There's always a time for champagne, isn't there? But after all, if there's still discrimination around, if people with disabilities are still living in institutions, then I suppose we'd better do something about it. We are advocates and people with disabilities after all. All right, well, now that I've got my attempt at Friday morning wake-up humour out of the way, let's get down to the serious business of this forum. And it is serious. Because whilst most of us in Australia have a range of lifestyle options from which to choose, some people with disabilities still live in institutional or congregate settings. And whilst many would suggest that this is appropriate and that the lives of people in such settings are very well supported, those lives are highly regimented, out of control of the people living them, and involve very limited life options. And sadly, the evidence also shows that people in such settings experience a higher level of violence than people living in the community. Now, I wondered when I was asked to make this presentation this morning whether I was the most appropriate person to be opening such a forum. I've never lived in an institution, and so I don't have that experience. I've got many friends who've lived in institutions, and perhaps some of them are here today. And I've spent many years as an advocate in the disability sector. And my views in support of deinstitutionalisation are very clear. But I'm sure that today I'll learn more than I share. And I'm also sure how important it is, if we're going to progress this issue and other issues in the disability sector, that the first voice should be the voice of people who have the particular experience which we're trying to address. So I did quite wonder whether I was the most appropriate person to open this forum. However, I'm here, so I'll do my best. But you might have to help me. You may have to answer some questions, because I like to know that people are still awake and listening to me. If you do have to answer questions, you need to remember my one behavioural fault. Well, at least the one I'm prepared to admit to. If you put up your hand to give me an answer, someone's heard this before, I'll completely ignore you. So you have to break those old school rules and call the answers out. Okay, first question. What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Coffee.
Yeah, yeah. For me, starting my day in Sydney this morning, pretty early, it's a bloody strong cup of coffee. Probably several cups of coffee. But really, what does get us out of bed in the morning? Now, if you were teenagers, the easy answer would be it's your mother, right? It's probably basic bodily functions, bathroom, hunger, your partner snores. And for some, it's a support worker. And for people living in institutional or congregate settings, it's often not at the time of your choosing. Now, I chose this question about what gets you out of bed very carefully because one side of it is sort of funny, but it gives real relevance to the issues being discussed today. The removal of choice about such basic issues as getting out of bed and, for that matter, going to bed, when meals are eaten, when visitors can come, etc., etc., etc. The list goes on, doesn't it? Just basic choices that most of us don't even think about making when we make them every day. So let's move it, though, to a slightly different issue, although that is the key issue of this forum. But as I've said, I'm not the expert. And what I want to talk to you about more is what motivates you to do what you do. Because, forums such as this, as well as being a great chance to learn, formally from presenters, and perhaps just as importantly, informally, from networking through peers, provide an opportunity to consider that question. So I want to start your thinking for this morning, because I think it's a really important part of the broader thinking that QAI are trying to achieve today. I can't provide a lot of input on the who, when, where and how of deinstitutionalisation. So let me focus on the why. And I want to talk about why we do what we do in our role as advocates and in our role as people with disabilities. And I want to remind you all that what you do really matters. You become involved at a key time in people's lives. You assist to facilitate a really important journey, and you can have a great impact on the quality of those lives. I'm going to start or continue with the words of a poet of our time. She sings these words, but you'll be pleased to hear I don't plan to emulate that. And these are the words. Have you ever fed a lover with just your hands? Closed your eyes and trusted, just trusted. Have you ever thrown a fistful of glitter in the air? Have you ever looked fear in the face and said, I just don't care? It's only half past the point of no return, the tip of the iceberg, the sun before the burn, the thunder before the lightning and the breath before the phrase. Have you ever felt this way? Now, does anyone recognise those words? Anyone tell me who sings them? Yeah, well done. I've got another Pink fan in the audience. Pink sings them in her Grammy Awards-winning song, Glitter in the Air. And I heard her sing them beautifully in one of her Sydney concerts some years ago. I admit I was taken along by my teenage daughter, but I was there. And I was entranced when I heard them, and I listened to them regularly on my iPod. Many people think they only apply to opportunities for love, but I think they beautifully capture a broader message for life. To throw glitter in the air, to take the opportunities life presents, and to live life to the full. I'm very much in favour of the view that if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much room. But living life to the full shouldn't only be an opportunity for 4/5 of the population. It should also be an opportunity for Australians with disabilities. And I mean all Australians with disabilities. Because despite what the Attorney-General tells us, discrimination still exists. And we can't live life to the full. That's why we need advocacy. That's why we need to commence the sorts of journeys that you're talking about today. And that's why we need forums such as this. Let me move from one iconic American woman of today to another iconic American woman of the 1960s. Yes, back in that period of history known as the last century. Some of us still remember it. In fact, some of us still remember far too much of it. And I'm talking about Rosa Parks. Now, who was Rosa Parks?
Black American.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent. She refused to sit at the back of the bus. And in the 1960s in the US, millions of dollars were spent on providing public transport systems, but in many places, if you were black, you could only ride at the back. Rosa's action in refusing to do this was one of the sparks for the civil rights movement in the US. But that was way back then, you might say. It wouldn't happen in Australia today, well, wouldn't it? For many people with disability, sitting at the back of the bus still isn't possible. We can't even get on the bus. And some of us can't even choose to leave where we live to go to the bus stop. These are just a few of many examples where opportunities aren't equal in the world in which we all work and in the world in which we all live. I want to talk about one more American icon, and it's a man this time, and his name is Ed Roberts. Does anyone know that name?
Yes.
Yeah, good. 1, 2. A few. It's not as well known as Pink or Rosa Parks, but Ed Roberts led the independent living movement in the US after World War II and helped to form Disabled People's International in 1981 and continuing, the International Year of People with Disabilities. I'm not going to talk about Ed a lot today, but I encourage you as travellers on the journey towards disability rights and on the journey towards deinstitutionalisation, I encourage you to read about Ed Roberts, because he was one of the main people who started what we're here to talk about today. He was a great man in whose figurative footsteps I'm very proud to follow and to be involved. All right, let me tell you a story, because it underlines the importance of the work which we all do and the amazing assumptions that are often made about people with disability. And also because it's a story about Queensland, and it's always good to tell a Queensland story when you're in Queensland. I'd completed a meeting with some senior bank officials in Brisbane, and walking with my guide dog, I got into the elevator on the 30th floor of their building at the same time as another person. And the lift buttons weren't marked. I discovered this on my way up. They weren't marked with raised letters or with braille. And there were no announcements in the lift to say which floor you're at, unlike this building. So I didn't know which one to press. And so turning to the other man in the lift, I said, "Could you press the button for ground, please?" I got no response. Thinking that he may have a hearing impairment, I mean, I was the Disability Discrimination Commissioner at the time. You've got to think about these things. I looked directly at him so that he could read my lips, and I said a little bit more clearly, but I hasten to say I didn't say any more loudly, "Could you press ground, please?" Still, no response. Puzzled, I reached over and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I repeated my request. "Oh," he said, "are you talking to me? I thought you were asking the guide dog." Now, my guide dog's good, but she hasn't learned to read lift buttons yet. Now, I'm sure that you could tell me many similar stories about assumptions made about people with disabilities. In my experience, most of those assumptions are negative and most of them are wrong, but they still keep being made. So people with disabilities keep having to deal with the soft bigotry of low expectations. So as well as swimming against the tide of negative attitudes, people with disabilities are disadvantaged in relative terms in today's society. Take a few measures of that disadvantage. And I don't need to spend long on these because you know these. But firstly, there's a high correlation between people with disabilities and poverty. 45% of us live in or near poverty. and this is due to low incomes, fewer employment opportunities, and additional costs due to our disability. In fact, we're at the bottom of the ladder of OECD countries in the correlation between disability and poverty. And for a country of our size, of our economic size and capacity, that's just a shameful statistic. I don't need to bore you with all the stats around it. As I say, I'm sure you've heard them before. Secondly, whilst Australia experiences relatively low unemployment, it's gone up a bit yesterday, but still relatively low, this is not the case for people with disabilities. We're employed at a rate 30% lower than the general population. And when we are employed, we're usually underemployed. And we are often just employed in one position and then forgotten about. And the third indicator of disadvantage is the level of people with disabilities in or who have been in the criminal justice system. There are high rates of people with psychosocial and intellectual disability in prisons across Australia. Prison, in fact, is a significant accommodation option for people with disabilities. And how shameful is that? 90% of women, 90% of women with intellectual disability have been sexually assaulted at some time during their lives. That too is a shocking statistic. There are high rates of violence towards people with disabilities, particularly in institutional settings. And when we report it, the justice system doesn't always cater for our particular needs, so it often goes unpunished. You know the stats, again, better than I do. So those and many others that I haven't talked about, but which you understand intimately, are the challenges or barriers facing people with disabilities. And, as I know you would tell me, these barriers are often even greater for people with disabilities living in institutional settings. And we as advocates have the task of supporting people with disabilities through or around those barriers. That's what we're all about. We have the challenge of assisting people, often with fewer life skills, to make decisions which will profoundly affect their quality of life for the future. So what gets you out of bed is working with some of the most disadvantaged and disempowered people in Australia. So no pressure, okay? That is a seriously awesome challenge. And talking of awesome challenges, what about the ones facing people living in institutional settings? Some of you are here today, and you'll tell your own stories. I don't need to tell them. I want to hear those stories, because the way you deal with those challenges is what motivates me to keep advocating. But can I compliment you on being prepared to come to a forum such as this and share those stories with us? Because you provide the rest of us with far greater insight and motivate us to keep working with you to make those journeys. Can I also compliment the organisations who've supported you to participate today and to tell those stories, the places in which some of you live. To be prepared to do that and to recognise that residents in your organisation seek a different lifestyle also, I think, merits congratulations. Now, some of you here might say to me at this point that I'm not really doing what I said I would do. I was asked to motivate you. And all I've done for the last 10 or 15 minutes or so is tell you funny stories and demonstrate how hard our job is and what a huge challenge that we have. And after hearing all of this, you might just go back to that bed and curl up in the fetal position. But I haven't told you anything that you don't already know. And yet you're all here, not in that bed back at home. And why is that? Because we're in this job, and many of us have been in it for many years because we, perhaps against the odds, are determined to support people with disabilities to successfully overcome those barriers and to live life without them. We believe that, just like every other Australian, people with disabilities have a right to take a risk and to own their own destiny. We know that when we come into contact with people with disabilities, they will be making critical decisions, what you do, where you live, sometimes for the first time. And we believe that it's both their right, but also critically important that they can make those decisions and not just be presented with limited options, even though in some cases they may make the wrong decisions. We think they should have a chance to a broader choice, and taking that choice away is denying people with disabilities our rights. We're in the forefront of creating opportunities for people with disabilities, and we know that if we don't facilitate those broad options, the chance to take those risks and the right to fail, it's less likely that anyone else will do so. So you don't need me to motivate you. You would have to be some of the most motivated people that I know to continue with those challenges. But rather than allow us to rest on our laurels, as the committed change agent that I am, I want us to continue to support people with disabilities to achieve those broader life choices. When I was young, many people told me that I couldn't be a lawyer, and many others wouldn't give me a legal job. But I, and people like you who supported me all those years ago, knew that I could. I can't imagine my life without the chance to take the risks that I took to get where I am today. I can't imagine a society diminished because it lacked the contribution that Australians with disabilities can make in all areas of life. And I'm profoundly saddened by the knowledge that many people with disabilities were never encouraged to take those risks and grab those chances. So thanks for the work that you do to give others the chances and the encouragement that I was given all those years ago. I really encourage you to use this forum to hone your skills and replenish your energy for the task ahead. And that's really, isn't it, what this forum is about. Deinstitutionalisation needs all of the skills and energy that we can muster. And I encourage you to continue to work hard to provide those opportunities. Don't be stopped by thinking that you, one individual, can't make a difference. Because you know what? The reality is that it's only individuals who ever do make a difference. Remove those barriers, grasp opportunities, live on the edge, and throw that glitter in the air. Thanks for the chance to speak with you this morning. I'm very proud to join you at this forum, and I'm very pleased to launch the DVD, which is part of the process. Thanks very much.